Thanks to Token Engineering Academy, whose invitation to collaboration gave me this amazing opportunity to review all these great platforms. And of course, special thanks to Messari for offering us this exclusive tour of their premium product. Our review today is going to explore the platform from the perspective of how it helps tokenomic engineering and analysis. We're going to focus on 4 key themes. Data coverage, what kind of data is being served on the platform, and how much of it provides insight into fundamental processes and activities taking place outside of exchange markets. Accessibility and flexibility. How easy is it to explore data directly on the platform and to export it to other work environments for further analysis and exploration? Documentation. How rigorously and thoroughly are the methods and definitions used by the platform described and communicated? There are always assumptions and workarounds involved, and it really helps us to understand what they are. And finally, best practice innovation. How does the data offering and the auxiliary resources around that support innovation and the development of best practices for analysis in tokenomics? This format will be applied to review 5 data providers in total. You can watch the whole lot in that playlist that's showing up on your screen now. And if you want more background on why I'm doing things this way, check out my earlier video explaining the importance of data to tokenomic engineering and analysis. This common approach will also help us compare all these platforms at the end in a final video, so make sure that you stick around for that. Ready? Let's go. And we begin with a platform that is perhaps the most well-known out of this bunch, Messari. The page we're looking at here tells us first what features we get with the Pro and Enterprise subscription tiers that we've been so fortunate to get access to. So we see that the Pro tier here, let me just make this a bit bigger so you can see, grants us screener access for up to 5 screens, 10 safe trading view charts, chart books, unlimited watch lists, live news feed, daily and weekly AI digests. So this is a new feature they've rolled out where they're using AI to summarize a lot of information into a shorter format that you can action. That's really cool. Daily governance charts, daily professional research. And at Enterprise, we get all of that, all the features in Pro, but now we have unlimited watch list screeners and charts, fundraising data screener. Okay, so this is going to be an area of focus for us, the fundraising data, in-depth diligence reports, enterprise-grade research, real-time key developments feed, live news feed, daily, weekly AI digests, again, real-time alerts, daily historical market data, and news API, okay? Daily historical market data, CSV down. Okay, so let's take a look at the homepage. Now, this to me, I've been checking with Messari for a long time now, but this to me has always reminded me of Bloomberg, the Bloomberg terminal. I used to work for Bloomberg for 2 years at the start of my corporate career. And, it's something about the way this is laid out. It seems very evocative of that. And let's start looking around. Okay, so here we have screeners. Screeners are kind of a way of organizing assets that, are of interest to you. Here we have intel, so we have like information, event-driven information. What do we see here? We have a hard fork, we have a flash loan attack, various newsworthy, financially material events being reported to you right here. Of course, we have, Bitcoin here. We have some reports we can access here in this view. More extensive sort of news feeds. These are sort of like the intel are sort of like really sharp, small alerts, whereas the news pieces will be longer format items. I just clicked on an alert there, and the news here is just a slightly more wordy piece there, as you can see. So already we're being told that this is a platform that's very concerned with news and events. The main key audience here are traders and investors who are reacting to real-time events and using that information to make decisions and take actions with their portfolios and in markets. Okay, now let's start clicking around to see what data comes into view and where it's stored. Let's click on Screener first, and it loads up. And we see we have a bunch of screens sort of preset for us, we have a vertical navigation here. So let's go, we have categories here. If we click on categories, we have DeFi stablecoins. Let's click on DeFi and see what we get. Oh, they have a DePIN tab there. That's interesting. Decentralized physical infrastructure. Let's click on that in a second to see what that contains. And what do we got here? Price, real volume, market cap, very market-centric data. I have a download option here, which allows me to download all this stuff. So I presume that this is just a way of organizing assets, right? According to which sector they belong to. And if I were to click on the DePIN screener, I would get a bunch of digital assets that are associated with this use case class, use case category. I wonder what's in here. This is an area I want to research. Of course, we have Filecoin, Theta. Yeah, these are the sort of tokens that are showing up here. And let's look at, okay, so what have we got in ecosystems, Ethereum assets? These are just different ways of grouping assets. And next up, we have the fundraising data, which is one of the new offerings they're making on their enterprise tier subscription. I found it a little confusing that this was stored in the screen section, because the screens have been established as a very asset-centric concept. They're screens that allow you to collect different groups of digital assets, whereas a lot of the views we're going to get on this fundraising data are not centered on assets at all. But still, they're tucking this into the screens concept, and you can see that clicking on that has brought up all of these different views, all of these different screens on that data set. Let's pick all funding rounds, which is probably one of the views that's easiest to understand when you're first coming to this data set. You have the round this is the project is reported in the second column after the index column, the date the round was closed, the source, what stage they're in, what sector, what category, the amount raised, of course. Now, personally, I really love this source column here, because at some point the stakes are going to be up and it's going to matter where information comes from. We have a massive quality control issue in this space. And if you're coming in maybe as quite early in your career, it may be hard to appreciate just how much data integrity matters. We can get excited thinking, wow, we have all of this data available, take it on good faith, and not realize that it really, a lot can still go wrong with how data is reported, how it's verified, and so on. So any platform that makes extra effort to show you where its information came from, how it was handled, is really doing a lot of important work, even if it's sort of like underneath the hood or something you might not think about as being important on your first go. So if I click on this source, it will open up a news page which confirms, well, okay, in this particular case, that information's depreciated. Come on, let's see. But you see what I mean here, right? It's just really hard. This website is not controlled by them, by Messari. It's impossible to really get on top of this stuff all the time. Anyway, back on this page. So this is cool. I can download this view. Now, I have to say, I love this data set, but I'm not a fan of this screening thing. I'm not a fan of having to click through back and forth. The views are impressive. I've just clicked on Asian investors. That's wonderful. Like, if you're in Southeast Asia and you want a quick view to finding out who's investing, it's amazing that I've got that in one click. But for me, as someone who's comfortable with data, comfortable with understanding how it's organized and how I might want to reorganize it into something else, a different view that's of interest, I find this UX a little cumbersome. Enough said about the fundraising data. We also have this cool stuff that's been a feature for a long time, investor portfolios, where you can sort of ape in, I shouldn't say that, but you can at least explore what investments all of these big VC firms have made, and use that to maybe inform yourself about some promising projects in the space. Okay, I think we've had a good look at screens. Rankings, let's click on asset rankings. This is just going to bring up a view. Very, again, very market and trading focused. Price, real volume, market cap, changes over different time periods. Let's see if I click on something more interesting. Okay, I can access these different areas from the left now. Protocol. So what all this is going to do is going to, again, filter these. They're kind of screeners. Again, it's just going to filter different lists, different groupings to enable you to sort of like arrive at some like for like comparison, understand who's in the different ecosystems. So we have exchanges, DAOs. Tools is interesting. This is a good resource. It allows you to, it gives you a list of all these kind of different data providers besides Messari that you can make use of. More to say about some of these guys soon. So that's what's going on here. Diligence. Okay, let's click on that. Purchase reports. Now, we got the we got the enterprise demo, but of course they know that if you open this up to everybody, like everybody just goes on a massive download spree. We didn't unlock the whole thing. So let's click here on Ethereum, and here we've now gone into the Ethereum view. We can access different things, different sort of like categories of information regarding Ethereum on the left there. But we're going to continue navigating on the top bar here. The diligence report is really like a briefer on what Ethereum is at a level of detail and rigor that would be considered acceptable to a professional investor. So this is an introduction, includes token usage and economics, technology, legal and regulatory issues, and of course the all-important legal disclaimer. Let's continue going up here. So we have these new diligence reports that are meant to present this kind of serious view on and evaluation of the standing of the asset, not some moon boy on the internet telling you, wow, this thing's going to 100x. This is like a really careful, considered breakdown of this asset and its standing, its situation, and its prospects. Intel. Here we have sort of like more newsy sort of data, all events, infrastructure, security, different events that are happening. Research. This is where I think, as well as news, this is where Messari really comes into its own. It has a lot of very exciting research. And the stuff that's being done in enterprise, I have to say, is a step above. I'm going to go to protocol overview. Okay, now let's navigate to charts. This is new, so let's click on chart books, comprehensive market trends and patterns by Messari. These charts, I think, are like really interesting data from a tokenomic perspective. I don't know if you've sort of noticed, but a lot of the way the information is organized so far drills down to really focusing on a particular asset. But really, when we're engaged in broader economic questions, we want to understand and learn from the experience of multiple assets at the same time, and not just say, okay, our new project's gonna perform in exactly the same way as Ethereum did. No, you need to look across the market, take averages, understand standard deviation of various performance and driver metrics, and use that to inform how you're going to model. So these charts really begin to add context and color to how assets perform over a range of different metrics. But as well as the Messari watermark here, actually, you've got powered by Artemis, powered by DeFi Llama, powered by DeFi Llama. So we're going to take a look at some of these platforms in later, and I just find it really interesting that even an enterprise-grade platform like Messari is making use of these fantastic data providers who are actually opening a very large chunk of their data provision for free. But this sort of stuff for me becomes really interesting. So daily transactions, daily active addresses, fees, DeFi. What is this sort of stuff telling us? This is now data that's no longer so market-centric, right? This is now about the broader range of economic activity that is associated with a project. If these blockchains are, meant to enable transactions, enable people to interact with each other economically, this tells us how much of that activity is going on at a root level. Stuff, daily active addresses, how many addresses are still, haven't fallen dormant. These could be really interesting signals of activity. Fees, if protocols have fees, how much are they generating? And so on and so forth. DeFi diversity, what is this? The number of dApps that comprise the top 90. So here we're starting to get into some really interesting stuff. This is some of the sort of like thought leadership around, what makes an interesting metric, what makes an interesting point of analysis. I've just looked at this just now. And this is really interesting, how much of a network is dominated by a handful of dApps, because that if you have a high transaction count and a high diversity of dApp usage, that tells you something about the diversity of the economy. Like if we use a real world analog, that would be like comparing, I don't know, the economy of Saudi Arabia, which is just oil, versus, a well-diversified economy like Germany or the United States. That it reveals sort of much richer, more contextual information that supports richer analysis. So I think we get some really cool stuff there. DEX turnover, this stuff looks great. So if I click on one of these charts, view full chart, here we can snapshot the chart or export it to CSV. We can change the time range. We're interested in looking at a few options there. No option to really play around with the charts. We can click each of these features in and out, but there's not that much being reported. And let's go to the next tab here on the top. Research charts. Watch lists is, again, your own custom screener, basically. Just gives us a lot of this kind of information. Now, I just want to sort of drill down, go back to the home view and show you what it's like to drill down into a particular asset, because despite everything I've shown you, there's actually a lot of information that gets revealed when we dig down into the asset level. So let's look at something. I'm going to click on Chainlink here. I think that showed me some interesting stuff. So I'm now going into this project view, and we have a lot of information. Again, market-oriented information here, charts, real volume, circulating market cap across different associated news events. So there's kind of like a little mini home screen that's dedicated to this asset, which is quite rich and informative. Price chart profile, diligence is available here. Markets, news, key developments, governance, DAO structured governance. So this is interesting. So now we also have, just in the same way that news events are really important to drive decisions, investment decisions, now that we have DAOs taking responsibility for important governance issues, that is also newsworthy and financially material, right? If you are an investor, you will be reading minutes of board meetings to see, what are the key decisions and strategic directions that are being taken by the company. And now that is all much more visible and arguably analyzable on account of the way that DAOs govern and how those processes are made visible by blockchain technology. Charts, supply. We can bring up supply charts here. But again, circulating supply, outstanding supply. Next, I like that, being able to sort of access that extra information right there on the charts. And this is one of the things that I really like about Messari. We're going to dig into this, but they have really rich concepts around circulating supply, which is one of the most misunderstood, fudged metrics in the entire blockchain world and world of blockchain data, which is ironic because every Bitcoin, will chew off your ear about how amazing it is that digital scarcity is secured by blockchain technology and all this stuff. But when it comes to all these other tokens, we have such a loose concept of what circulating supply is and how it's even tracked and measured properly. And I really think Messari stand out in grabbing the bull by the horns and being realistic about the fact that there's sort of like lots of different ways to view this and providing you with a range of measures. So, top marks, in my opinion, on handling this issue. Address count, active address count. Again, these are more fundamental oriented data metrics here. Network activity, what do we get with this? Transaction volume in units, adjusted transaction volume, average transfer value. Okay, so a lot of richer information here. So Reddit subscribers, Reddit users. So this is really interesting. This is like alternative data that paints a picture of user engagement in addition to the sort of on-chain metrics that we have. And actually, there's one more piece of data that they're going to be releasing on the enterprise tier that we don't yet have access to, but luckily they gave us an exclusive preview. We are going to get token unlocks data, vesting and allocation data. And you'll know this is a pet interest of mine because I was working on, structuring token offerings, managing them, helping them, meet their fundraising goals, get listed. And this data is a nightmare to collect, unfortunately. It is just in a similar way to how outrageous it is that circulating supply is not really well-defined or well-tracked. The same applies to token unlocks and vesting agreements, which are often not even implemented using a smart contract. And projects just say one thing and do something else because there are no immutable controls on their terms, and chasing people up to find out what changes have occurred and all this. It's a real nightmare. So the fact that they're making an effort to report it, even if it's just for these top 25 tokens here, that's cool. I can click on that and go to where that is. Okay, and presumably this gives a preview of how it will look in Messari's platform. I'm just going to zoom in. Oh God, this view is absolutely terrible. I'm trying to make it more visible for you guys. But anyway, we obviously have the vesting schedule, the famous pie and fan charts, and we have a lot of information, not just pictures, but hard quantitative data, descriptions on what these allocations do. Exciting stuff. We're not going to see the prices paid for private investor rounds. That information is very hard to come by, and it varies a lot, unfortunately. When I was working supporting a launch pad, I was looking at ZAFs day in, day out, and we were building up this massive view of all the offers that were crossing our table. But if you are not a VC, if you're not Launchpad, it seems that that information is just not being shared publicly, and it's a real pity because it's a great disadvantage of founders to figure out what their position is. But with this fundraising data here that we were exploring earlier, you will still be able to get a much better picture of who the investors are in your sector, how much they've invested recently. You'll be able to do a lot with a data set like the one we explored there earlier. Okay, now we get to the next section where we start thinking about how flexible is this data? How easy is it to access, to play around with, to analyze? And I don't know what's going to make it into the final edit, but there were certainly a few moments where I expressed some frustration about how I wanted to get to some view and how I didn't feel it was immediately accessible through the UX. I was certainly saying that about the fundraising data here, which, look, I get it. Some investors are not data people. They like just clicking through, but I really don't like this click to a different view thing at all. So this feels limiting. If I go to charts, the chart books, again, how it doesn't feel like it feels difficult to specify different things that I want pulled up in these data. The metrics are great. They're like, wow, I want to know more about this. It's not clear to me why these are the only the only networks or projects that I can include here. I'm going to zoom into full chart here again. I can click each one of these series in or out of view or highlight them, but why can't I pick, who's in here? I don't understand that. Maybe I need to learn something. No, I mean, this is super cool. I love it, but why don't I have more flexibility over what happens here, how it's displayed? Of course, if this was, I understand this is not like a deep analytics platform, but even before we get to that, like I think there's sick interactivity that could be offered and would improve this experience. And the other thing that I'll mention is that because Messari grew from this kind of very asset-focused concept for its data organization, you could see that these more sort of horizontal features seem to be more of an afterthought. You've got these great rich views on socials, on activity, transactions, but putting that into context is really hard. And they've got all of this data. They've got it. And that is really, when you're talking about comps in finance, it's all about that. Is this high relative to the market? Is this low relative to the market? So they've got all of that data. I really hope they go and invest in sort of creating a more context around some of those measures. They are launching an API. Let's see, what do we have here? But if we look at the API, is still very focused on market data, intel, all the event stuff we were talking about, news, and governance events and the research reports. It is not currently setting it. It's still in beta, but the current view is still sort of very much centered on that core product that is really important to a lot of people of market data and material market news and governance events. Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about is documentation. Messari's got a standout documentation hub. They're going all out here. It's a lot of work, but this is how it is. When you go up to a certain level of care, diligence in finance, you have these massive documentation areas that need to be made available and need to be maintained. So this looks like it's a lot, but it's actually appropriate to their clientele. Let's start looking at methodologies here. I personally love this. We're getting a lot of information about how they define particular things. And this is how it should be, guys. It should be long and detailed. And if you don't love this sector, it will be boring. But this is how it should be. Absolutely everything, exclusions, backfills, like down to the fingernail or whatever the expression is. Let's have a look at my favorite subject here. Let's have a look. Methodologies, fundraising data. We've got information on fundraising data here. Really good. Metrics and definitions. Where is the one that I like the most? Supply, current supply, active supply, issuance and inflation, supply distribution. I was just about to read all of this out to you, and that's going to be quite boring. So just go check it out for yourselves if you're interested. But I, as I said earlier, I think Messari are leading the way on being careful about this all-important fundamental metric. If we're serious about the token being an important element of our, how our economy functions, supply is absolutely key, and we need to get to rigorous definitions. And protocol metrics and definitions, categories. I love this. Okay, so the final thing to cover is think about how Messari platform supports idea generation, education, and the development of standards and best practices in tokenomic analysis. And I think that Messari is going to get top marks here. Like, as I was just gushing about reviewing this documentation, the level of care and detail that goes into this shows you that they're being serious. And what's wonderful is that the documentation is absolutely free. I was reading Messari documentation before I even had a pro subscription, And it was a great place for me to start thinking, I have this funny hunch about circulating supply. Oh no, like top leading analysts in the world are having exactly the same thoughts, and this is how they've decided to approach that issue. So even if you're at the start of sort of like a tokenomic career, just reading documentation is really, and which is completely free, is really going to put you ahead. But of course, Messari is about so much more than documentation. A big part of this subscription are all these amazing research reports that they do. Okay, so let's just actually go back to ETH for a second, because I found a really striking, impressive looking report there that, shows that they're really taking analysis quite far. So here in these quarterly reports, we have really, really detailed analysis with, my favorite thing in the world, lots of great charts. And you should be reading other people's research to give you ideas. And, this stuff looks really cool. I wish I had a longer trial period with this platform, if I'm honest. And looking at the key metrics here, they're starting to report these kind of like financials. They're not strictly like financial statements, because they are they're mostly reporting on-chain activity. But this is really cool. So we have a bunch of different classifications here. We have financial metrics, network metrics, ecosystem metrics. So this sort of like summarizes a bunch of key financial and fundamental data into one view that I think is really rich and begins to allow you to contextualize some of this data more. But again, why is this an image? Why isn't this an interactive data table? This is, again, frustrating to me. Case why we can't interact with it. Anyway, this is really rich, and when it's done by analysts of this caliber, it will help you improve your thinking. And again, a lot of this information is going to be much more investment oriented, but stuff's going to come up about things that happened in the economy, things that happened in its governance, that will give you ideas about how you ought to be designing your project, what things you need to be on the lookout for, and so on and so forth. So top marks to Messari for really providing strong leadership in defining what good analysis for this asset class ought to be.